Johnsonville sausage strips are strips of sausage that look and cook like bacon. They come in amazing flavors like original, maple, or chorizo. Now, you can transform your BLT into an SLT or turn your bacon cheeseburger into a chorizo cheeseburger. It's not bacon. It's Johnsonville sausage strips. And it's a meaty miracle. Find it by the bacon, even though it's sausage.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're having a fun time today going through these free agent reviews by position. Today, another good one with Dev Panchwagh. Dev, how you doing, buddy?
I am good. It's getting exciting. You're seeing players hit the news because they're getting released, and then we've got the unrestricted free agents already out there that people have been sizing up. So this is going to be one of the most exciting off seasons in NFL history, I think, because of the salary cap mayhem. Mm-hmm. So looking forward to getting into all that with you.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the defensive line today. Here, important note, and you just brought this up. It's March 11th today. So these will all be released by the 17th. But as you mentioned, there may be significant changes to the free agent landscape before then with additional COVID-related cap casualties.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's fluid. So I would imagine there will be some updates. And it's the type of climate where you and I could have this conversation, and then all of a sudden somebody gets released, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is a guy you have to completely throw out your original game plan for defensive line and just go pursue him. That's the type of climate we're in.
Yeah, and honestly, that could lead to a domino of additional cuts potentially, and including ones on the Ravens. If they found a young player, they've got a couple older defensive linemen who could be cut. Not in an ideal situation, probably, but who knows, in this world we live in. All right, well, let's start. And I think it's always important to start with what the Ravens situation is currently themselves. I mean, they are sitting with an older defensive line, which, by the way, tells you right off the bat that an active free agency might not be that likely.
Yeah, right. I mean, they've kind of made their commitments financially, and also just prioritizing the established players that they have on their line. But it's a good bet. I mean, we got some idea from Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh. They had their pressers recently that one of the priorities is keeping Brandon Williams. He's the most notorious player that I think is talked about in the circle that, is he a good cap casualty candidate? It does make sense based on how much they value him as a Raven. I mean, you think back to all the efforts they've made between giving him this big contract, he's one of their prized players. And I think as a locker room guy, he obviously has a tremendous amount of value. So, and he's obviously been the linchpin for the run defense for a long time. So I think that he's a guy that you should just kind of account for him being in the mix going forward. But to your point, he's also someone that could be a chess piece that not chess piece, but just kind of someone that gets released as part of an effort to maybe move on another position for perhaps.
Right. I mean, the Ravens are very old on the defensive line. And the point I make is that they need to get younger quickly. Brandon Williams, last year, his contract. Calais Campbell, last year, his contract.
Right.
Derek Wolfe, a free agent at 31. So if you re-sign him, it's going to be a short-term situation. And the only really young player they have that's exciting on the team right now is Justin Madubuike. And he's been terrific. And they struck out, I believe, on their other pick. Broderick Washington didn't have a good rookie year before. The year before him, it was Daylon Mack, who didn't have an impressive rookie year and eventually got cut. The Ravens, are in a position where they may really need to draft 2 defensive linemen this year, though that won't be particularly sexy.
Yeah, it smells like that could be a possibility. It's kind of like when we had that conversation about cornerback, where you're like looking at it and you're like, okay, on the surface, there's a lot of top heavy, like just physical ability. They're covered well here. Then when you peel back a bit, you see that guys' contracts are up. They're old. This is one of the oldest positions on the team, right? So if not the oldest, it makes a lot of sense, I think, where mid-round selections, but then you look at it and you say, well, mid-round selections, they haven't been able to hit on those. So I think Madubuike is, I've got high hopes for him. I know you've talked about him glowingly as well in just your reviews. I think he's the type of guy that could break through, and just if you give him more snaps, he could really, that could be one route, right? Like you just give him more snaps and you just let him start. But yeah, to your point, overall, I do see it being addressed in the draft. I think it could cause Ravens fans some consternation because it could be, they might draft a defensive lineman instead of a receiver, but it could also be completely valid given that free agency probably won't, and we'll get into it, but that might just have to be the route they go because this is a very specific system, and who they bring in, they groom and they get them in a position. Like Brandon Williams is a perfect example, right? They've mapped it out. They've really developed their players in house. So all that being said, I think, yeah, 2 players could easily be drafted, and that wouldn't be a wrong move.
So one of the things about getting younger is that free agency is not typically the place that you do that. Unlike some of the other positions, though, and we really noticed this when we reviewed the outside linebackers, it's a very much an older group. There's a lot of variation in age in the defensive line group. You have players like Ndamukong Suh, who's out there at age 34. We talked about him, or Tyson Alualu, who was a specific run defender who could help the Ravens probably at the right price. But and maybe even that's, if you got Tyson Alualu, maybe that's the player you let Brandon Williams go for if you traded. But just go through. There's a lot of variation in age, and there are some young players out there, most of whom the Ravens are not going to be able to afford. Solomon Thomas is out there, who's 26 years old. I'm sure he came up in your review.
Yeah. He came up, and then I omitted him off the list. I'm like, what is the reality that this is going to even happen? But he is. You make a great point. I saw the same thing when I was looking at the list. I'm like, there's a lot of 27, 28, and then you get up in age. And not to say that it's not worthwhile to invest in those players because it. Frankly, is going to be a tight squeeze for a lot of teams. So there might be an opportunity for you could maybe get a Solomon Thomas on a cheap 1-2 year deal. It's possible with all the other teams that don't really have much to spend. But the age group is concerning. And I don't know that if you make a move on, maybe not Solomon Thomas, but some of the other guys, that I don't know that it's an upgrade. I think it's kind of like just a lateral move, and you might be moving some resources around. You could make a case, like you said, okay, like what if we release Brandon Williams, you sign Tyson Alualu, fill that gap, and then you maybe let Wolf go as well, and you're just like, all right, well, we'll give Madubuike some more snaps, but we'll also add another veteran defensive end. One of the guys on my list, for example, is an old Raven, Lawrence Guy. So that could be an option, and it's not a sexy option, but that's kind of what we're looking at with this group.
No, he's functional. He played well in New England, probably even better than he did in Baltimore. And I thought he was a very good player for Baltimore in his last year here in particular. But he's 31 years old, and he is like Derek Wolfe. Like Brandon Williams, he's a shorter term option in terms of how long you're going, how long you'd have him here. There's another ex-Raven that's out there, Brent Urban, who certainly is a pretty good player with the Ravens in terms of being a run defender, and was an unbelievable snap monster, very much similar to Wolf in that regard, and in both terms of position and what he does well on the field. But he's also 30 now, and he still has not struck gold in the NFL.
Yeah, that's surprising to me that he's 30. But yeah, he's another. Actually, he's a good call out. More so, I think, than Lawrence Guy, who might be dangerous, in terms of you bring him in and he could just be about to fall off a cliff. But I think Brent Urban legitimately had some good reps with the Bears. He played well. I saw a couple of their games on primetime, so he showed up. He wasn't. He's not. Again, this is. I don't know. You and I are on the same page about it, but again, you're still splitting some of those snaps with Madubuike. So I think if you're looking at him rotationally and then you fit him in on some third down play or whatever it is, right? Like what you did with Wolf, that's fine, I think. And I don't have a problem with that kind of outlook, and then you bring someone in with those very specific snaps, high volume or high value to volume snap almost. You kind of have to just map it out that way.
Yeah, Urban was really great in his time at Baltimore at playing most first and second down snaps and then being a part of some third down packages, but not all. So he's not really ever been a great pass rusher, and he's always had kind of a atypical run defense snap to pass rush snap ratio, which is telling you he's playing mostly on first and second down. What I kind of like about that is that currently they're using Matabike for a fair amount of those first and second down snaps. Maybe with his quickness and the ability to stunt and whatnot with Matabike, having Urban for first and second down means you move Matabike into more of a third down look. And they play slightly different positions because Urban is really more of a natural 5-tech, but nobody gets to play that exclusively in the NFL anymore. Because you play so much nickel, there isn't really a 5-tech. Yeah, and he has to end up playing a 3. Yep. Yeah, and so I don't think it's unreasonable that you could see Matabike take a bigger pass rush role this year and have a player like Brant Urban come in and be a big value on first and second down, playing with probably both Williams and Campbell on those downs.
Right, I like that school of thought. Actually, I mean, that totally would be in favor of that. You give Matabike those snaps, get him going on pass rush downs, and then envisioning whoever they bring in, if it is Urban, for example. And Urban's a good guy to think of because he has proven himself to be able to play on those run first downs. So he's his length, his size, leverage, he's figured out how to play. I remember when he first started out, it was tough because his height would kind of be very Calais Campbell-like. Like he's got to play low, but it's tough for him to get low. So I think he's figured all that out and turned into a pretty good player. Maybe not quite as good as I think the physical raw ability he had coming out of college, but he's turned into a nice ball player. So yeah, I'd be all for that. And I think just giving Matabike the chance to unleash him on those pass downs, I would love to see more of that. And from the 3-tech, like you said, like inside position. So I think that would be a good way to approach it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's kind of go through from, I guess, the top down and talk about your 3 or 4 guys you really like for the Ravens, and I'll kind of respond to each.
Sure. So one of the guys, I mean, I don't know how realistic some of these guys are. So Shelby Harris I'm going to start with him. I think he would be, like, let's say, again, like hypothetical where you're not bringing back Wolf, right? When you're talking about possible upgrade, I think he could be a possible upgrade. I think he's the same age, which is funny to me. Again, getting back to this group of players that I'm like, how are they 30 and 31? Like, I just remembered that they were younger guys because Harris is part of that group of Denver players that, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's part of that group. He's part of that group, right? Like the Barrett, and they ended up having Ray, who they drafted. So they had a bunch of guys on that defense, and it's just they never got like full. They never got the full time to shine. So I mean, not that he's been there, but I think he's played really well for them. Really good ball player, honestly, and I think could add a little bit of an extra dimension. But I don't know how realistic he is from a financial standpoint. So that's
yeah. I mean, he's going to get paid. Yeah, I mean, he's been extremely good.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. No, I think you hit it because I think I saw a projection for like a 3-year deal for $30 million or something like that.
That sounds about right. I mean, that sounds about right. In terms of looking at snap count, he played about 40% of the snaps last year. The previous year, he played about 60% of the snaps. So he's shown an ability to be more durable than he was last year when he missed about 4 games at midseason. When he's in there, he's a terrific player in pretty much all aspects. So he's going to get paid. A very disruptive player. He's a 7th round draft pick of the Raiders. He was drafted number 235 overall. That has got to be one of the best ever 7th round picks. I know Hushmanzada was drafted around then, but it's very rare for a 7th round pick to be that good.
Yeah, for sure. No, you don't hear about that typically. So, and I was wrong. He's 29 right now. So actually
30 in August.
Yeah. So age wise, good, right? Like pretty good, not ideal. You want somebody maybe like 25 or something, 24, 25.
Yeah, players aren't free agents then, so you really have to. Those are the guys you have to get from the draft. But if you're the youngest free agent in this year's crop, that's a good player, Solomon Thomas, who's 26 or will be for the season. I don't remember if he's already crossed that threshold or he's going to be before the season. And then after that, you have Ogunjobi at 27, Dalvin Tomlinson 27, Rankins at 27. Yeah. The point is that if you went to another position, there isn't even that sort of variation in terms of age. Right. The players tend to be typically uniformly older.
Yeah, totally. Right. So it's a tough mix to sift through in terms of, almost like getting a nice like medium ground. But yeah, he's been terrific. To your point, 7th rounders, typically receivers. Yeah, I've heard of a couple of receivers doing well. I think maybe, if I'm not mistaken,
Marcus Colston.
It was the Packers receiver that I'm drawing a blank right now, but before the Devontae Adams group with Jordy Nelson and them. But anyway, they had a 7th rounder who I think performed well, and I'm just blanking on the name right now, driving me crazy. But
I think Marcus
Donald Driver, I think
Donald Driver. All right,
he was a 7th rounder, but yeah, this guy is in the prime. You could argue he's a good ball player. To your point, probably out of their price range, but I think would be an upgrade for sure. If they brought him in, he would be worth it. But depending on how you view that money allocation.
Yes, Donald Driver is drafted number 213 overall in 1999. But yeah. Let's talk about another player. Who else do you like that's in the group now that maybe would or wouldn't fit into the Ravens' budget?
Well, along those lines, it's interesting. I had Jarrell Casey on my list, and here's another situation. Well, it's interesting because I thought he was somebody that could be worth looking at last year, and then the Broncos made that trade for Casey. Which was it was looked on the surface as a good trade. I know he didn't stay healthy last year, but he's still, if he's got something left, he again presents a skill set and I think an ability to get after the quarterback that is unique. That he can split gaps, he can get into the backfield quickly. He's disruptive. We saw what he did in that Tennessee Ravens playoff game a couple years ago, so he can be really good in that role. And it would be really intriguing to see him paired with Matt BK, or kind of like, how could you maybe leverage those two guys or kind of play around with them? But yeah, he's somebody I think is he one of these guys that might linger on the free agent list for a little while because he gets lost in the shuffle. He's 31, so he's again same age roughly as Derek Wolfe, right? 31. So
yeah, so Wolfe I think might be a little bit younger, but Casey turns 32 in December, and okay. I have the numbers for ages I have and that I'm reporting here are all what is their football age this year, which is usually 12/31 is how they define it.
Yeah, so that's fair. So that I think is something you have to take into consideration. And in addition to the fact that he was mostly hurt last year, so just pulling up his stats for right now, and he barely played. So Denver cut him loose quickly, and I think that was a clear 1-year rental type trade. The question is then, what is his value? I mean, he's good. He's basically he's been highly productive though as a pass rusher, I would say.
Yes.
Like his entire career, he's at minimum given in 5 sacks. So if you can bottle that up and get something out of that, I'm okay with that. I think that's an interesting move if they don't bring back Wolfe.
Yeah, it'd be a Philadelphia Phillies of the 1980s move. The Philadelphia Phillies had an unbelievable response to getting older is they went out and they signed a bunch of even older players like, Pete Rose and other players until finally they had a bunch of young players ready to replace them who weren't bad. But it would be an interesting move to go out and get a player like Casey when you're already constructed the way the Ravens are and need to get younger. The Ravens, let's just make one more point about this. The Ravens need to get younger on the defensive line. Doesn't necessarily come from the abilities of those players because the older players they have are very good on the defensive line. They're among the best players on the team, and the Monstars certainly all showed up when they were there, played well last year. The problem is they need more money for the offense. They have historically underpaid offense that they have to convert defensive salary cap to there. Getting rid of Earl Thomas, big help. They've got a bunch of expensive cornerbacks, and you can't spend at every position on defense. So that means they're going to have to stay cheap at inside linebacker where they are currently. They can't spend their entire wad at outside linebacker, and they probably need to cut the total spending on the defensive line, which happens after 2021, but isn't going to happen for this year, it doesn't look.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, because and we're going to keep going through this list, but a lot of the considerations here are swapping one guy for another, 1 year, 2 year kind of maneuvering, if it makes sense financially, and also in some cases, if you're just valuing a certain skill set or ability versus another. But I don't think, I think Casey would. Like in this example, right? I think if you're Eric DeCosta, and I think he articulated their approach to building a roster so well, I thought a couple of days ago when he said, sometimes you value that trait a little bit more. You look at Casey and you say, all right, he's an elite pass rusher at this position. So maybe we just got to go for it like they did with Yannick, so just kind of like, if it's in that respect, and the money makes sense, then I could see it. But otherwise, we're not talking about this is not, like, to your point, because there's a knock on the guys that are currently under contract here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a great interview from DeCosta. What is it, yesterday, 2 days ago, whatever it was at this point, but really gives you a lot of confidence about the guy's ability to be a very great GM in this league for years to come. Oh,
and I loved that comment, because to me, I know you and I kind of bang on the table sometimes for certain. Again, getting back to a trait, right? He described it so well. A dominant trait. I'm okay with paying a pass rush specialist. Now, does he have? I mean, I know we know the Ravens historically want somebody more versatile, can play the run, can drop into coverage, but sometimes it is what it is. Like, a guy is just really good in an area that you're deficient in. So it confirmed to me that I don't necessarily need him to confirm this, because I know he's smart enough to know that and pour over that. But it was just great to get that out there, right? Like that they know and they consider that. So, I guess kind of wheeling back to this point, I think, if Casey's around the same money as Derek Wolfe, I would strongly be in favor of that. But
wow, that would really be something if he was. He's the kind of player, if they really want to go for it this year, and they think, they work him out and they think he's healthy, they think he is where they want him to be physically. I wouldn't have a problem signing him for 3 years with, 1 year being a void year, maybe 4 years with 2 void years kind of thing, where they're effectively really paying for the cap in future years. So this is one of the things that has come out. I've changed my philosophy in the last couple of weeks on this, because there is expected to be, with these new TV contracts, such a sharp increase in the cap with the Amazon money and with the network money being much higher. It may be that the cap curve will be escalating so much that it really makes sense, more than it has in the past, to borrow those future dollars, which will be inflated today. And so to do that, you can obviously do that with some void contracts, and it really reopens the door to some players that we thought are already gone. The primary one being Matthew Judon. I think the Ravens honestly may decide, and if you look at the rest of the outside line, I don't want to go too far on this, but the rest of the outside linebacker market is so flawed or weak or specific. Judon is really the guy in that group, and he's young at 28 relative to the rest of those guys who are, a lot of them are over 30. It just makes more sense to me now than it ever did, given what people are projecting for the cap to be the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I agree. It can even get to that point because of the fact that when the contract structures are on the face of it, you could make the argument that Judon's like cream of the crop in terms of a straightforward contract structure, or there's going to be a group of A-listers that will just get paid and it will kind of line up like it normally does. I think structurally, I don't know that he's in that group, and I just don't like. Shaq Barrett's a good example of a guy I could see being in that group. But then even if you look at Tampa Bay re-signing Levante David, they did have the voidable years in that contract. So it could just be everybody is going to fall in that same bucket. Now, the question would be, for the players, it's almost like, do I take a chance, and if it's Judon debating between Jacksonville and Baltimore, with the similar structure, then it's a pretty easy decision, right? Like, you would probably want to stick in Baltimore, because the teams that can spend, there's a nice mix of teams in there that are not contenders, at least not right now. So that there's a group like Cleveland, Baltimore that can spend, but they're proven commodities almost. So that's also going to be, I think, a sub almost component here.
Right. I want to speak to that just for a moment, if I can. The three direct competitors, the Ravens, who philosophically are more or less aligned and also have money to spend, they're very dangerous to the Ravens, and they're going to compete for every one of the guys the Ravens wants. The Colts, the Jets, and the Patriots. And the Patriots, of course, play this whole bullshit game last year of having a bunch of people sit out, pushed forward a bunch of cap into now a time when it's very valuable. I mean, it was completely, if you don't think Bill Belichick was entirely behind it, you're a rookie on earth, is what I've been saying. So, they completely, figured out how to game the system for a COVID cap year, and they did a great job of it now, and they're in position to really take advantage of it. Unfortunately, they value outside linebackers and some of the traits the Ravens like in similar ways. The Jets, with Douglas coming from Baltimore, they value players, I think, across the board. And you can tell that by the number of ex-Ravens that are on the Jets right now. And then the Colts, of course, are a contender. They have to address their quarterback situation and figure that out. But I think they're a team who's going to try and contend and will compete with a lot of players with one of the highest cap numbers of all.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about the Colts is they're kind of constructed similarly to the Ravens. They value a lot of the same traits. The defensive front construction's a bit different because they play, I think, a cover 3 scheme. So they're looking for a little bit different type of player up front, but that's minimal differences. Like, I think the idea is, though, they value the same type of philosophy. So yeah, and to your point, their dollars is going to be a tough thing to match up with. Ballard is amazing at, I think, managing the cap, or somehow, some way, roster construction wise, they just have a way of maximizing their salary cap space. So, but that's pretty, you nailed it. And I think if you look at that group, and then Miami might be interesting too, because they have some similar philosophies, pass rush wise, like how do they deploy their rushers. So the Ravens would be competing with that group. But yeah, I guess ultimately, and with this edge group, they're going to have to make some decisions. Which scheme do you favor? The Ravens do have a lot of strong, I think, attractive qualities for the players that are out there defensively to come here.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anybody else on the list for you that you want to talk about specifically that, hey, we should get this guy or we should consider him?
I don't know if I'm putting the cart before the horse on this player, and it's a bit of might be cheating because we're talking about defensive line, and I don't know where he fits into that, but Carlos Dunlap is an interesting guy. And I know that there's been some rumblings that Aaron Wilson had reported that the Ravens are interested in him. Now, I will defer to you because you're I think you're one of the best at pinning down where a player can fit within the structure of a scheme, but almost like down to down almost. So here, I would qualify him as a defensive lineman first, just hands down pass rusher. That's all we mostly know of him. I don't know if he's dropped much at all on coverage situations, but he's 1-to-1 like a replacement for Yannick Ngakoue to me. I mean, he could play do some inside. I guess he could line up inside a bit, but his size, his length, there's a lot to like there. Again, he's not a typical 3-4 defensive lineman, but
no, he's a 4-3 edge.
4-3 guy.
So we talked about him in the outside linebacker group. I do kind of like him, despite the fact that he's 32. He just turned 32, in fact. But at 6'6", 280, what he would hopefully add for the Ravens is the ability to play still on that edge on rundowns. He might fit the Ravens scheme. He might be a little bit too slow, but you're right. Then Yannick Ngakoue, if you bring him in only on passing downs and use him as a pass rush specialist, then I think you probably maximize his value. He'd be playing less snaps than he has in recent years. And by the way, he's been quite the Iron Man with Cincinnati for all these years. I mean, he hasn't played fewer than 600 snaps since his second year in the league, and that was 2011. So I mean, that's 9 straight years of 600 plus snaps at defensive end is really, really hard to do. It's all about price. In his case, he played pretty well for Seattle at the end of the year. I think that there'll be some interest there. If it were 2 years, $5.5 million kind of thing, if he fits into the middle class that kind of loses out on a lot of the good contracts, I think he's in the Ravens price range. If he's 2 years, $9 million, I think he's probably out.
Yeah, I could see that. So we're on the same page about him, and I did want to sneak that one in. One last name I had, and he's a real defensive lineman in the context of what we're talking about, Michael Brockers, who got cut. In very interesting case scenario here, because obviously he had a big contract lined up with the Ravens originally, failed his physical, and they moved forward with Wolf. Now, what is interesting, I don't know that they would revisit this at all, because obviously medically, if you didn't pass the first time, like, why would you go down that road? But the only thing I'd like to throw out there is he played really well last year. He had, I think, and I'd have to double check the numbers, but statistically, he had one of his best seasons. We know that Rams defensive line was awesome, but it's really interesting. I did a little bit of digging on him after the news went down that he was released, and the Rams fans, the Rams followers love this guy. Think he's terrific. He's and don't know why he was released. Like they're beside themselves that he was released, because how can you protect Donald right inside? So he's kind of that bodyguard. He's a good ball player. They obviously vetted him, and they know he can bring a lot to the table. So are you going to go reverse then and bring him in, and he would be an upgrade for Derek Wolfe? I don't know. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind here is it might not just be the Ravens not wanting to go back there because of some injury. It might be Brockers saying the Ravens reneged on their deal. That, yeah, they found something bogus in terms of my injury here, but what they really decided is that Derek Wolfe was a cheaper alternative. So they told me they were going to give me a $30 million contract for 3 years, and then they reneged on it because I had a hangnail. And, I think I have heard things like that with respect to Michael Grant, the wide receiver from the Redskins a few years ago. Oh yeah, Ryan Grant
at the time. Yes, Ryan Grant.
Yes.
No, Ryan Grant was the. Am I thinking about the same
I think so. Player? The same thing went down with Grant. Yeah, he was with the Redskins. Yeah. He was a slot receiver. There was bad. It was bad. I mean, how he felt after the fact. So yeah, that's fair. But I wouldn't be totally shocked if it. But that's Brockers got
back and got the same total contract value from the Rams, but it obviously was structured differently from what the Ravens had offered him, or at least I think it was, because he's gone after 1 year.
Right.
So
right. Yeah. And so of that list, and I'll just end on this, and I know you got guys on your name. The guy I like the most is Casey, and everything we talked about. If you're able to do what you said, money wise, it can fit, and maybe you do give him a couple years on that deal. I really like that fit if they were to pivot away from Wolfe. But that's okay. That's my piece on that.
No, I would be. I think you could structure a contract for Casey maybe with incentives that would make it very good. And since one of the nice things is, since Casey played only 3 games last year, there's a good opportunity to structure NLTBE incentives, not likely to be earned, that exceed last year's numbers, but allow you to put a large portion of the cap cost of the 2021 contract into 2022. And I know other teams are going to be looking at that too. So the Ravens aren't going to have a monopoly on that, but they could certainly structure something, I think, where Casey says, play 5 games. Of course I can do that. Have, X number of whatever else. Of course I can do that.
Yeah.
So it's going to be something could be structured, I think, that would push a lot of that money into next year. It'd be a very interesting way to approach the defensive line. I almost think they have to have an offsetting cut to get him in the fold.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Dalvin Tomlinson, we kind of ruled out already. I mean, the only other guy, there's some decent run stoppers. Damon Harrison is out there. He's 33 now. Mike Pennell a little bit unknown guy who's been a pretty good run stopper now for some years. I like Brent Urban better, probably for that. Is Leonard Williams? He didn't get tagged, so I assume he's still available. Is that correct?
Oh, you know what? I thought I saw that he did get tagged. That's why I held off, but I did not confirm that 100%.
It kind of doesn't matter because the Ravens can't afford him no matter what. But
yeah, that's like a dream. That's the type of guy where you're like, all right, we're just going to have to chuck the game plan out.
Yes. Player. So big Kawan Shorts out there at age 32. The only other name that maybe is out there that I just mentioned briefly, but is Mr. 1-year contract himself, Ndamukong Suh. Right. Does he fit the Ravens in any way?
I do not believe he does. I think he would just be frustrated playing in this scheme. And so I know they vetted him a couple years back. I forget who I know he was under their radar. They considered signing him. I'm just drawing a blank on who they ended up going with instead, because it was between him and some other defensive end. And this was before he signed with Tampa. So it's been a couple years. I apologize for that. But in terms of, if they did that much homework on him and supposedly were considering him back then there must be something to it. Can he play on certain downs? Can you maximize his ability? I don't know how much he has left in terms of explosiveness and explosion and just sheer ability to get in the backfield and be disruptive. I don't know. I think he's okay, but I'm not crazy about it. I think he seems like a good guy. I think he seems like a better guy now. Like he's kind of cleaned up some of his act. Not for nothing, Ken. I saw him do an interview with Shannon Sharpe. I think Shannon Sharpe's got a podcast, and he said Ray Lewis is one of the top 5 defensive players and on his top 5 list of all time. So he's got high reverence for the Ravens and Ray Lewis.
That's nice to hear. You just say that Suh has played 11 years in the league. He's averaged more than 900 snaps per year as a defensive lineman. That is incredible. Wow. What the Ravens perhaps could offer Suh, who appears to perhaps be in decline, even though he had a decent sack total last year, and is still getting the quarterback a reasonable amount. He played almost 1,000 snaps last year. At age 33. Yeah. So would it make sense that the Ravens would bring him here on a contract for 1 year, probably have him expect to have a reduced snap load this year? And maybe that's not the kind of deal he wants. Maybe like everybody at this age, he wants to sign one more 4-year deal. Kind of thing. But if he could play 1 year, incentive laden, and the Ravens, would just have an understanding with him that his snap count's going to drop to 650 this year.
Yeah,
and he's only been, by the way, he's never been below about 870 snaps in a season. Never. Well, one time in his second year he was just over 800. But he's never been in the 650 range. So it'd be interesting to see if that could rejuvenate his career and if he'd really benefit from playing fewer snaps.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition. It's something that they kind of did it with
Campbell.
With Campbell, exactly. Yeah. So that's the pitch. And why not, right? Because he won a championship. He's got that off his resume. So I think at this point in his career, we don't know his motivations, but it could very well just come down to, I want to stay healthy. I want to play maybe 1 or 2 more years at a high level and then kind of ride off in the sunset. And the Ravens do a good job of protecting their veterans, giving them time, days off, things like that. So I think on a macro level, in terms of a pitch, I think that they would easily be able to make that pitch to him, and that could hold some weight. And they may value that. The question, I guess, would be, and I guess in this scenario, you're playing him, you're playing Campbell. Campbell can play end, so that's the advantage on third downs. So you would just supplant Wolf, and then you play Madubuike, and maybe do some rotation with those two, or do some finagling with Suh, kind of alternating snaps, I guess. But I think that's my only question: is if he comes on board, like how do you manage that? And who gets which snaps in pure pass rush downs?
Right. So they did have Wolf doing a lot of that last year. He got many of those snaps largely because Campbell was out, but they also played a lot of the race car with 4 outside linebackers on the field. Right. So, maybe McPhee loses some snaps on the inside. Maybe Ferguson loses some snaps on the inside. Those are both possibilities. Ward had some of those snaps on the inside. Also, he may not be here. So the Ravens, I think the least of the Ravens' problems would be finding a space for Sue to be useful on the field. The problem would be, is he affordable, frankly, given how much of an Iron Man he's been his whole career?
Yeah, I think he could fall in that group that's just kind of waiting. I don't think he's going to be signed immediately. I could be wrong about that. Mm-hmm. So that could help. And he might be selective too. I mean, there's a certain short list of teams that I'm going to sign with at this point in my career.
Yeah, it's a good point, because a player like Sue, you have to give up maybe a 4th round draft pick or possibly even a 3rd round draft pick, depending on how the comps foil out. But this is going to be an offset to a comp if they sign him during the early period. So it doesn't make sense for him to be signed before that ends and you have the free uncompified signings you can make.
Yeah. But, he's a good name though. I really, it's funny you brought him up, and he was under my radar, but I just didn't 100% see how he could fit. You made a good case for it though, and he's the type of player that the Ravens, again, like we said, they pursued him in the past, and he's the type of player, because of a lot of the credentials you laid out, very specific skill set, durable. He's a good ball player. He's been one of the best at his position for a long time, right? So kind of like has a lot of the same qualifications as Campbell. But not quite Campbell-esque, but just the idea being he's a good ball player, a veteran. You know what you're getting from him. He's going to be on the field. He's going to produce. So that all is stuff that they gravitate towards.
Yeah. Always a pleasure here. These conversations go so fast, Dev, but always appreciate having you on the show, my friend. And tell people where they can find your work.
Sure. Thanks so much for that. And I do appreciate these conversations. It's funny. We just, as an aside, we started to talk about it offline, and then it's like, how far can we go with defensive line? There's not too much to poke at, but turned out but love to have more of these conversations. I'm at Dev Panchwagh on Twitter. Free agency is probably the most, in terms of engagement you'll get from me. I mean, draft is I'm still a little bit behind there. So, but anyway, whatever questions you have, whatever you want to bring up, feel free to get to me there. And I also still, of course, write for Russell Street Report. So nothing at the moment. I had a piece about the wide receiver coaches, which the Ravens' recent wide receiver coach hires, which we talked about in a previous podcast. So look out for that article. I have it pinned on my profile. Have a lot to say about that, but future projects coming up, and I'm sure we'll intercede with free agent moves that the Ravens are going to make.
Yeah, real good discussion with Deb, by the way, on his wide receiver, on both of the 2 new receiving coaches, passing game coaches, we'll call them, T. Martin, and I have to get the name right, but
Keith Williams.
Called him Keith Washington. Sorry about that. But anyway, those 2, that article is, the podcast is up there, and Deb has some great comments on those guys, and I really appreciated that discussion as well. Could give it a look out there on the website. Folks out there, if you want to be on a Film Study short, just send me 3 short bullets, if you will, or any information, any specific topic that's highly focused you want to talk about. We'll get you on as quickly as we can. Timely topics, always the best. Lots of people have been contacting me about Orlando Brown and things about that, but really anything is fine. And we'll, of course, look forward to having you show up on draft coverage that we do. And Dev, thank you again for coming on the show.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.